Ariadna Lopez. In today's video, we examine a disturbing true crime case where a single piece of CCTV footage became the crucial key in solving the mystery. On October 31st, 2022, the body of Ariadna Lopez was discovered along the roadside in Moros, Mexico. She was 27 years old. At first, it appeared to be merely another tragic accident, or one more case, destined to be forgotten in a country where criminals often go unpunished. Authorities claimed there were no indications of abuse and concluded she had died from intoxication. But something about it did not seem right. What had Ariadna done? Why did she leave Mexico City only hours earlier after spending time with friends? And why did the official account collapse so rapidly? Major flaws within the system emerged, revealed through a disputed autopsy, a second forensic report offering a completely different conclusion, and two state governments pointing blame at each other. Before her tragic death, Ariadna Lopez had lived a life filled with both aspirations and hardships. She was 27 years old when she vanished. Her childhood was spent in impoverished neighborhoods of eastern Mexico City. Everyone called her Ari, as she was the youngest of 5 siblings. Her mother had passed away from cancer a few years earlier, and she struggled in her relationships with her father and older half-siblings. When she eventually exhausted her safe living options, her family effectively forced her out. Friends described her as always cheerful and lively, constantly dancing, singing, and enjoying classic rock and comedy. She adored her 7-year-old son and dreamed of improving their lives by relocating to Cancun in the Caribbean. Ariadna took on various jobs in Mexico City to provide for her child. First, she worked as a beautician and later as a waitress at a 60s rock bar in the Condesa neighborhood. There, she encountered many different types of people, some of whom were wealthy and influential. She lost her restaurant job during the COVID-19 pandemic, but afterward she opened a small nail salon. To her, it was more than employment. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. It was the means to maintain independence and manage her finances. Running the business was Ariadna's way of expressing her determination to stand on her own. She operated the salon using the skills she had developed and the contacts she had built. It provided her with renewed purpose and stable earnings. Around this period, a new man entered her life, and she quickly grew close to him. She felt emotionally secure and comfortable in their relationship, which was unlike how she had felt for a long time. She cared for her son, managed her business, and nurtured this new relationship. Ariadna continued moving her life forward. The rhythm of her daily routine gave her happiness, though it was not without challenges. Even as things appeared to improve, trouble was already emerging. Through mutual acquaintances, Ariadna met Vanessa Flores. Their first meeting was at a party attended by Ariadna and her circle. Vanessa immediately stood out because she was young, attractive, and quick to make friends. She came across as someone who left a strong first impression, warm, relaxed, and sociable. But for those who knew her more closely, another side appeared. Beneath the surface, she was reckless, unreliable, and rarely true to her word. Then there was Rodel Astudillo. Rodel, in his mid-30s, was frequently seen alongside Vanessa. He was a wealthy businessman with a taste for luxury. Always hosting and taking charge, he projected an extravagant lifestyle that drew attention. Young women were drawn to him because of his wealth, his wide network, and his promises of better opportunities. Yet something about him always felt off. Rumors circulated about his connections to influential figures, including some questionable ones, though no solid proof existed. He never discussed his business publicly, and if anyone pressed him with too many questions, he would quickly redirect the conversation. He carried a composed, commanding presence that could either put someone at ease or make them uneasy. Vanessa and Rodel were a pair that people found both fascinating and peculiar. For Ariadna, meeting them marked the beginning of a story no one could have anticipated, one that would ultimately end in silence. Although Ariadna was intelligent, practical, and strongly independent, she did not immediately recognize how her new acquaintances differed from those she normally knew. Vanessa enjoyed boasting about her connections, especially her relationship with Rodel. She was constantly striving to leave a positive impression. She presented him as someone with significant power, capable of resolving any issue. Gradually, Ariadna began spending more time with both of them. Among the two, Vanessa seemed especially drawn to her. She went out of her way to win Ariadna's trust by offering compliments, opportunities, and a sense of belonging in a world that felt new and thrilling. Roddle took an instant interest in Ariadna after Vanessa told him about her. When they first met, he came across as charming, well-kept, and attentive. He made the effort to ask questions, listen closely, and speak with assurance. He had the ability to make anyone feel significant, and Ariadna was no exception, though something more complicated lay beneath that polished exterior. Vanessa played a major role in bringing them closer together. She often invited Ariadna to intimate gatherings, dinners, and parties where Roddle would be present. Everything seemed relaxed and ordinary. People joked, played music, and chatted. It all felt effortless. Over time, Ariadna started to feel like part of their circle. But not everyone approved. Some of her close friends expressed their concerns privately. They warned her to be cautious, insisting that Vanessa and Roddle were not truly what they appeared to be. There were whispers that Roddle carried a bad reputation and that Vanessa was unpredictable. Yet to Ariadna, this posed no concern. She dismissed it as idle chatter. She believed befriending Vanessa was refreshing, offering a break from the pressures of motherhood and running her business. Roddle's gestures, generosity, and open invitations did not appear insincere or manipulative. She viewed this new environment as enjoyable and perhaps even empowering, though something much darker was quietly forming beneath it all. Vanessa began sending more messages, calling unexpectedly, and arranging more frequent meetups for drinks or dinner. Without realizing it, Ariadna was becoming increasingly entangled in their world. It seemed like just a casual dinner invitation with friends when Vanessa asked her out on October 30th, 2022. She explained it would be something simple at Fisher's, a trendy restaurant in downtown Mexico City. Ariadna accepted, thinking it would be harmless. At 5:55 p.m., only minutes before leaving to meet Vanessa and Roddle at the restaurant, an unusual post appeared on her Facebook page. It read, "Are you going to miss me?" It remains there still, surrounded by comments and farewells from those who knew her. Later that evening, the group gathered. The table was lively. Despite the flow of drinks and shared plates, Roddle remained the focal point. As the night wore on, the group suddenly shifted plans. They decided to spend the rest of the evening at Roddle's place. He proposed the idea, and Vanessa strongly encouraged it. In a more private setting, she assured, the atmosphere would be calmer. Vanessa gently persuaded Ariadna at first, and eventually she agreed. Soon after, the group piled into Roddle's car for the short ride. His apartment in the Roma neighborhood reflected his wealth. It was an upscale residence within a secured building, with tall walls, restricted access, and surveillance cameras. Around 7:45 p.m., half an hour after arriving, several friends departed the apartment. By 7:55 p.m., just 10 minutes later, Ariadna's final WhatsApp activity was recorded. Nearly 2 days later, on November 1st, 2022, news began circulating across Moros. An early morning bike ride along a rural road led two cyclists to the body of a woman lying on the side of the road. The location was isolated, far from roads and neighborhoods. It was deserted and silent. She was clothed, yet her garments were dirty and torn. Her arms and torso were covered with bruises and dark marks, obvious evidence that she had been in a struggle. The cyclists immediately called the police and took photographs of what they had discovered, in case they might help with identification later. After several hours, the police arrived and quickly sealed off the site. The soil showed tire imprints and drag marks, indicating the body had been transported. It was evident she had been harmed, yet there were no stab wounds, gunshot wounds, or other visible causes to explain her death. There was no ID phone or money. She remained an unidentified person abandoned in a forgotten place. Her identity was still unknown. Within hours, images of the body began spreading online, sparking heated debate across social media. Among those who saw them were Ariadna's relatives and friends, who had been frantically searching for her since she was last seen at Roddle's residence. Her tattoos were easily recognizable to her brother Omar. Terrified of the worst, he contacted the police, stating that the woman found in Moros might be his sister. Around the same time, Moros state officials opened their own investigation, but the initial handling of the case drew heavy criticism. Later, accounts from witnesses and media reports revealed that crucial crime scene procedures had not been followed. Insufficient evidence was collected, and some traces were not properly documented. These errors fueled suspicion regarding the professionalism and integrity of the local authorities. The family's fears were confirmed when they arrived to identify the body. Omar recognized her instantly by the tattoo on her shoulder dedicated to their late mother. The shock was unbearable, made worse by the state of her body. Her arms and face were marked with bruises, a clear indication of abuse. Yet, at the time, police statements were inconsistent and failed to provide a definitive cause. The family found them vague. They demanded an investigation that was both thorough and transparent, and soon they began publicly calling for justice. That same day, Ariadna's story was circulated on social media by her relatives and friends. What started as a small online effort quickly expanded to include thousands of voices. Despite rising public pressure, the Moros police initially stated her death might have been accidental until a complete autopsy report was available. This only deepened suspicions, particularly the notion that someone influential could be attempting to shape the narrative. Soon after, police summoned Ritel and Vanessa, the last two individuals known to have been with Ariadna. The first official account of events was based on their statements. Ritel claimed Ariadna had chosen to leave his apartment in the Roma neighborhood after the gathering and call a taxi on her own. According to him, she appeared somewhat upset but not deeply distressed. He said he escorted her to the building's entrance and saw her depart. Vanessa supported his version, adding that Ariadna had not mentioned where she was headed. Yet their story began unraveling almost immediately. To begin with, there was no evidence of a cab collecting her. Investigators confirmed that several taxis had been dispatched to the area that night, but none of the drivers reported picking up Ariadna. Complicating matters further, Vanessa's account kept shifting. At first, she insisted Ariadna had left her alone. Later, she admitted the two had argued earlier that evening, which might have left Ariadna upset. Ariadna's friends also informed police that Vanessa had called them, suggesting Ariadna might have harmed herself by referencing the cryptic post she made on social media hours before vanishing. Relatives and close friends had initially dismissed Ariadna's puzzling post as nothing more than a poor joke. Authorities, however, began suspecting it revealed her true state of mind that night. What was even more troubling was Vanessa's increasingly erratic behavior. The messages she sent to Ariadna's friends seemed planned. They played down the situation and tried to keep the talk from getting into the specifics. She even said in one message that she was afraid of being accused, but she didn't say why. The police saw this as a red flag. It looked like she might be hiding something important. In the beginning of the study, things were not very clear. The details of Ariadne's death were not clear until new evidence started to come to light, thanks to the work of both police and private forensic experts. After 2 autopsies, surveillance video and text messages from the suspects' phones were found to be telling a different story. The first autopsy that was done in Morelos found that Ariadne had died of lung aspiration, which caused her to suffocate. The report said that food and booze in her airways could have killed her, but her family said that wasn't true right away. They pointed out the bruises she had on her face, arms, and legs that were barely mentioned in the first report. When Ariadne's body was taken to Mexico City for a second independent autopsy, the case took a big turn for the better. The family had asked for it because they didn't believe the Morelos prosecutor's first story that she had choked on her own puke after drinking all night. What the new forensic team found told a very different story. The exam showed that she had a lot of direct force injuries, including serious damage to her head that could not have been caused by an accident. On her face, arms, and legs, dark bruises and cuts were discovered. Many of them looked like defense wounds, which means she may have tried to defend herself during an attack. There were signs of violence on these marks, not from a fall or a medical event. The second autopsy found that Ariadna's death was caused by a physical attack, not being drunk. This important discovery completely disproved the first story that the Morelos officials told. It changed the case from a suicide to a murder, which prosecutors would soon change to a femicide under Mexican law. After that, there was no turning back. The story of an unintentional death was changed to unquestionable proof of violence. For the first time, Ariadna's family had strong proof that what happened to her wasn't an accident, but a crime that needed to be punished. Then one of the most important pieces of information came in: security footage from Raudel's apartment building's parking garage. In a video clip taken the next morning after the party, Raudel can be seen bringing Ariadna's dead body to his car. From a different view, we can see him putting her in the car and driving off of the building. It was no longer a guess what would happen. A picture schedule was now part of the investigation. It would help figure out what Rattel and Vanessa had been saying from the beginning. The surveillance video changed everything because it proved beyond a doubt that Rattel was involved in taking Ariadne's body away and hiding it. When Rattel and Vanessa's phones were taken by police, the digital trail showed even more. Text messages between them showed that they were working hard to make their stories match up for the cops and to explain things to Ariadne's friends. When Vanessa told Rattel that she was worried about the pressure from the victim's family, he reassured her, "Everything is under control." In one conversation, he even told her how to answer questions without making people suspicious. While this was going on, Vanessa kept telling Ariadne's friends that she was emotionally unstable, and that she might have hurt herself even though there was no proof of this. She said Ariadne didn't want to go home because she was fighting with her flatmate. Then she said it was possible that Ariadne's phone had just run out of power. This story was very different from what Ariadne's friends told police. They said she was happy, social, and full of plans for the future. They also said she didn't seem depressed or like she was hurting herself. The couple went to Ariadne's wake on November 3rd. Rattel told the press a story about what happened that the police later proved to be false. Vanessa wrote to her boyfriend that night to tell him that words alone wouldn't be enough to show that Ariadne got out of the building alive. They needed a video or something. Once they were ready, they made a social media post with a picture of them with Vanessa. At this point, there was a lot of proof. Blood from Ariadne was found in the flat while it was being searched. It was clear from the second autopsy, the security video, and the found text messages that the body had been killed. Ariadne's death was not an accident, and she did not just leave Rattel's house. This woman had been harmed, and her body had been hidden on purpose. These results were the most important parts of the criminal case against both individuals. Vanessa was the first person who was grabbed. Her arrest got a lot of attention from the public, and cameras were there to record every moment. Vanessa claimed that she had nothing to do with Ariadne's death. When she was first being questioned, she said she didn't remember what happened after the event because she went to bed early the night of the event. She later tried to say that she couldn't remember things because she was drunk. But when police looked at her story against phone records, surveillance footage, and comments from witnesses, they found big problems that couldn't be ignored. The story Vanessa had been saying did not match up at all with the phone records. Through messages, it was clear that she knew exactly what had happened that night and had talked to Rattel about it. Investigators also found that she had deleted pictures, messages, and other data that could have been important evidence. This was done on purpose to hide the fact that she had helped cover up the crime. Rattel moved when the heat got too high. He turned himself into the police with his lawyers by his side. In front of the cameras, he insisted that he was innocent. He said he had never hurt Ariadne, but he did say he had hidden her body because he was afraid of being wrongly blamed. His story went that he found her unconscious in his flat the morning after the party. He moved her body to avoid being caught because he thought she was already dead. But his story fell apart very quickly. There was no question after the second autopsy. He said he found Ariadne dead for no reason, but her death had been brutal, which was clearly not true. Surveillance video showed him carrying her body in a planned and hidden way, without calling for help or the police. His texts with Vanessa showed that they were working together to make up a story that didn't fit the facts or the proof. Concerning claims started to come up as the investigation went deeper, pointing to a possible link between Rattel and people working in the Morelos prosecutor's office. It was interesting that the first autopsy in Morelos didn't talk about injuries that definitely showed violence. Activists in Ariadne's family said the judge was covering for Rattel to keep him from facing legal consequences. The police investigation led them to a group of businesses that he and his family owned. This person is charged of running two businesses. The first is a parcel and courier service, and the second is a private security firm. The parents run a number of businesses that sell computer parts, office furniture, car washes, and polyurethane belts for cars. He has a brother who works for an airplane and a brother who is a lawyer. Most of them live in nice areas of Cuernavaca, which is the capital of Morelos. As people got more angry, officials in Mexico City said they would look into what the Morelos lawyer did. The Office of Internal Affairs started looking into possible wrongdoing. The case quickly got news across the country, showing how the justice system is flawed and how public pressure can move an investigation forward that has been held up. It became clear that at least one of the suspects was hiding important details about what happened that night as they were questioned and new proof was looked at. So far, neither Vanessa nor Rotel have taken direct blame. Their words were more about protecting themselves and explaining what they did than admitting the truth. Investigators reconstructed a clearer narrative step by step using various witness accounts, digital evidence, and psychological assessments of the suspects. Events started smoothly at a lively restaurant in central Mexico City, where Vanessa and Rotel, joined by friends, shared dinner and drinks with Ariadna. Afterward, the group went to Rotel's apartment in the Roma district. While Vanessa and Rotel acted as hosts, attendees noticed tension between them. Vanessa, in particular, directed a few cutting remarks at Ariadna, who remained composed and prevented the situation from escalating. Roughly 30 minutes later, around 7:45 p.m., the friends departed the apartment. The following day, October 31st at 10:27 a.m., Rotel's driver was recorded arriving at the location, exiting the vehicle, and returning shortly afterward. Half an hour later, Rotel, identified as the suspected killer, was caught on camera carrying Ariadna's body from the building to the SUV. The final surveillance images captured him leaving the premises and traveling toward Tiatlán, the area where Ariadna's body was later discovered. Investigators suspect Vanessa accused Ariadna of drawing excessive attention from Rotel, though the precise details of the dispute remain uncertain. Texts retrieved from both defendants' phones confirmed they later discussed the heated arguments from that evening. According to the investigation, Vanessa turned violent after becoming heavily intoxicated. During this period, an incident occurred that inflicted fatal injuries on Ariadna. The account revealed that Vanessa's rage, intensified by alcohol and her unstable temperament, played a central role in the tragedy. Rotel's subsequent actions, seemingly aimed at concealing the crime, compounded the situation and ensured an even graver outcome. The initiation of court proceedings marked an important step toward holding those responsible accountable. Although some officials opposed it, the family insisted on transparency with the support of their lawyers. From the outset, the case largely centered on the actions of Rotel and Vanessa. Prosecutors presented damaging evidence such as surveillance videos, phone records, and recovered text messages. All of these pointed to Ariadna's body being concealed and suggested the perpetrator might also have been directly involved in the violence that caused her death. The defense argued it had been a tragic mistake, but witness testimony and forensic results repeatedly contradicted that claim. Naturally, the court also examined the motive. People familiar with Vanessa described her as temperamental and irritable, traits that alcohol often worsened. In contrast, Rotel Astudillo was revealed to have a suspicious past and links to organized crime, which further deepened doubts about his role in the events of that night. Both defendants continued denying guilt, yet their accounts clashed with the physical evidence. This only widened the divide between their claims and the established facts. Government officials' responses elevated the case's significance even further. Oriol Carmona Gondra, the Attorney General of Morelos, faced accusations of manipulating the investigation and concealing evidence to shield the suspects. This triggered a federal corruption probe. He was arrested in August 2023, dismissed from office in early 2025, and later acquitted in April 2024 due to a legal technicality. Despite his dismissal, public pressure played a crucial role in exposing what many viewed as an institutional cover-up. A final ruling has yet to be issued. Prosecutors have filed charges that could classify Ariadna's death as femicide, a crime regarded in Mexico as the most severe form of violence against women. If the court upholds this classification and convicts them, both defendants could face sentences of up to 70 years in prison. Moving on to the next case. Brittany Zimmerman. Planning a wedding can be one of the most stressful but also thrilling moments of a person's life. It marks the start of life with someone you imagine growing old with. It represents a fresh beginning of what is hoped to be forever. That was exactly the way 21-year-old Brittany Zimmerman was feeling. She was caught up in a whirlwind of wedding planning. Her mind was still floating after her longtime boyfriend had just asked her to marry him, and she was fully immersed in organizing her dream wedding in Hawaii. Life felt perfect for Brittany. She was studying to become a scientist and had mapped out her entire future. Yet all of her plans were permanently halted because she never expected to be brutally murdered inside her own home. The tragic case of Brittany Zimmerman involved numerous mistakes, prolonged investigations, and unkept promises. She lost her life on a normal day in April 2008, leaving her loved ones with immense grief. She had been born in Marshfield, Wood County, Wisconsin, on November 15, 1986. Her parents were Kevin Zimmerman and Jean Zimmerman. From the beginning, Brittany and her brother Matthew shared a very close bond. As a child, Brittany was described as cheerful and full of energy. She enjoyed reading books and watching movies. Her favorite series was The Chronicles of Narnia. She attended Marshfield Senior High School, graduating in 2005 with excellent grades after completing several AP courses. When she finished high school, she already had her entire life planned out. Her school guidance counselor said Brittany's goal was to become a doctor. She enjoyed challenging classes and was determined to succeed, even though she realized it would require significant effort. She enrolled at the University of Wisconsin-Madison to pursue medical microbiology and immunology, which was slightly different from her initial plan of simply becoming a doctor. In her free time, she loved cooking, baking, and trying out new restaurants whenever she wasn't writing or studying. Brittany chose to explore different restaurants instead of hopping between bars like many college students, and that made her stand out. Brittany seemed to already have plenty to fill her schedule, right? Yet there was more. Despite her demanding routine, she also volunteered at the American Cancer Society Hope Lodge. Brittany truly embodied kindness and generosity. Many people admired and were drawn to her because of those qualities. She had been in a relationship with Jordan Gonnering for several years. They had known each other since childhood, and their friendship gradually became something deeper. They complemented each other perfectly, both being compassionate and ambitious. When Brittany's life grew overwhelming, Jordan provided the calm and stability she needed. People might have thought they had already been married for years if they saw them, even though they were still young. It was obvious that these two were committed for the long term. When Brittany enrolled at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Jordan went with her. Eventually, the two moved into an off-campus apartment in downtown Madison. Jordan supported Brittany's ambitions and dreams and stood by her in both good and bad times. They had been together for years while in college, so it seemed natural to make it official. One night, he got down on one knee and asked Brittany to marry him. Brittany was ecstatic. Since her boyfriend had become her fiancé, she was enjoying her best college life while planning her dream wedding. Brittany had always imagined herself working as a doctor or immunologist in Hawaii. It was also the place where she pictured her wedding, so that's exactly what she and her fiancé planned. At the time of the case, Brittany had also been employed at the university campus registrar's office for 3 years. Exactly so. She was responsible, punctual, and flawless. Everything suggested that Brittany was living a relatively normal, if not ideal, life. But when everything seems perfect, a single tragic event can shatter it all. That's what sadly happened to Brittany. On April 2, 2008, Brittany's schedule was packed. The following morning she had classes, and she returned home around 11:30 a.m. She went back to the house to meet her fiancé, Jordan, and the two even talked on the phone again afterward. Brittany then worked on her laptop for about 18 minutes, from 12 p.m. to 12:18 p.m., according to Computer Activity. But after that, things went downhill very fast. Just 1 minute later, at 12:19 p.m., Brittany's phone dialed 911. There was silence on the other end of the line when a female operator picked up the call, but what sounded like screams and a struggle could be heard. The operator kept asking questions, and when no response came, she shockingly disconnected the call. Even worse, she took no action afterward, such as alerting the police or sending help. She assumed the call had been accidental and that nothing was wrong. But that assumption was far from true. Meanwhile, Jordan went to class and returned home just before 1 p.m. that same day. He froze in his tracks when he noticed the lock on the security door was broken. Brittany had always been extremely cautious about her safety. That was one thing about her. She always locked the door carefully and double-checked the locks before settling in. So to Jordan, this was both strange and frightening. As dread coursed through Jordan's body and mind, he stepped inside and called out for Brittany. Nearing the bedroom, he was struck with disbelief at what he saw. Brittany, just 21 years old, was lying motionless on the floor next to the bed. Overwhelmed with grief, Jordan dialed 911. That was when police and emergency services finally arrived on the scene. Upon arrival, the officers saw a devastated Jordan begging them to save Brittany. He was heard repeating again and again, "She's the nicest person ever." Why would they do that? Jordan had to face the unbearable sight of his fiancée, the woman he had planned to spend forever with, in such a horrific state and in their own home. It was heartbreaking. Only hours earlier, Brittany had been alive, healthy, and happy, but now she was gone forever. The room was in disarray. It was clear that Brittany had fought hard against her attacker, but in the end, she lost and her life was taken. Because the door lock was broken, the police first assumed it was a burglary, but nothing of real value had been taken. Detectives also found it odd that thieves would target college students. It didn't make sense, since most students barely had enough money to get by, let alone possessions worth stealing. For context, at that time in Madison, Wisconsin, there had been issues with homeless individuals breaking into homes to take things, even though the area was generally considered safe. So, had someone broken into Brittany's home? And if so, why hadn't they stolen anything? That was the central question. Determined to uncover the truth, detectives began collecting evidence. They used swabs around the scene and gathered multiple fingerprints, footprints, and DNA samples, though many went unidentified. As part of the investigation, the police did everything possible to piece together the case, but it was going to be a long and difficult process that required questioning hundreds of transient individuals. At that time, Wisconsin communities were very generous toward the homeless. People often left their doors unlocked so they could come inside, and they organized numerous fundraisers and food drives to support them. While these efforts were compassionate, many worried that not every homeless person could be trusted, as some had histories of crime and weren't afraid to repeat it. Though heartbreaking, the belief spread that Brittany may have been attacked while trying to help someone in need. People were also furious with the Madison County Police Department because there had been 3 other unsolved murders in the same area that closely resembled Brittany's case. Many feared that a serial killer was at large and that the police were failing to do their job in solving these crimes. Another major source of outrage was the brief 911 call Brittany made. The call was placed most likely right before or during her attack, which is chilling. Brittany had reached out for help, yet the operator ended the call, leaving a woman in clear danger without even attempting a callback or dispatching an officer to check on her. This was especially baffling since the police station was located only 2 blocks away. There was no valid reason an officer couldn't have gone over immediately to check the situation. The public had every reason to be outraged at both the police and the 911 system. This emergency line was designed to save lives in urgent situations, but when Brittany needed it most, it failed her completely. The operator later tried to defend herself by claiming she had returned Brittany's call, which turned out to be false. Though she had called back, it was to a different number, not Brittany's. It would have been one thing if she had admitted her mistake, but instead, she lied to the public about it, which was unacceptable. To make matters worse, the investigation was going nowhere. Detectives had questioned numerous homeless individuals and compiled a list of possible suspects, yet the case appeared to stall. Following the 911 mishandling, for major news outlets, the Journal-Sentinel, the Wisconsin State Journal, WTMJ-TV, and WFSC-TV Madison, filed a lawsuit against the police. The whole thing lasted for about a year. In 2009, not even the call that Brittany made to 911 had been made public. However, a transcript of the call was included in court papers. But this transcript was just a list of the sounds of the fight and screams that could be heard. We know about this call and what happened in the first place because of these court papers. A few people were already on the police's mind at this point. Some of the suspects were guys like Thomas Cosgrove, Jeffrey D. Ball, Chauncey Mack, and others. They were all homeless and thought to be violent. Some of them were caught breaking into homes and public places. The people there seemed very shady and had weapons on them. Even though they were all checked and DNA was taken, none of them could be linked to the crime scene. They weren't the ones who killed Brittany, even though they had a past of bad behavior and violent crimes. The study slowed down for a few more months until someone gave them a tip. It was a small step forward in Brittany's very complicated case. The person who gave the information said that a man was seen in the area where Brittany was struck. David A. Call was his name, and he did a lot of terrible things. To begin, he was an addict and had several DUIs. He was also found guilty of pushing himself on a woman. Even worse, the police questioned him almost 6 times about Brittany's attack and never found any evidence against him. There were people in the area who saw him around the time Brittany was attacked, but it looked like he was just asking people for money to fix his flat tire. But he really meant to use that money to feed his addiction even more. At that point, the only information the police had about David was from a few people who saw him in the same area. But there is nothing bad about being in a place where a horrible murder happened. It's just wrong place, wrong time. Now keep in mind that this is 2008, even though the police had a lot of DNA proof. DNA technology wasn't as good back then as it is now. This only meant that Brittany's family and friends had to wait with the cops. The Zimmerman family was in a lot of pain as time went by, and they were afraid they would never find the person who killed their daughter so violently. That is, until 2014, 6 years after Brittany's sad death, when there was finally a DNA match. In 2014, a piece of male DNA was found on Brittany's shirt sleeve, and it matched someone. Even scarier was the fact that the person it matched with was someone the cops had already talked to a few times. No one else but David Cale's DNA was in it. There was a lot of work in the investigation 6 years after Brittany's death. It's funny that David wasn't hanging out in the streets anymore at this point. He was in jail because he had been convicted of drunk driving 1,000,000 times, but there was something wrong. His DNA didn't match perfectly. An incomplete DNA match wasn't enough to convict David of Brittany's murder because it had been so long since the attack that killed her. For the trial to go well, David had to basically admit. But did David do that? Of course not, but someone else did come forward. His name was Andrew Scholes, and he was a friend of David's. Funny enough, he had also been convicted of a crime. He was locked up at Gilmer Federal Correctional Institution in Glenville, West Virginia, because he had a gun that was illegally in his hands. Andrew said that David admitted to killing Brittany, but he wouldn't say anything else. The police realized at this point that Andrew wouldn't tell on David unless he could get something in return. Since Andrew wanted to get out of jail, they knew it wouldn't be easy. It is so upsetting to see someone taking advantage of a family's pain and trauma for their own gain. The mother of Brittany, Jean, begged Andrew to do the right thing and help bring Brittany to justice, but Andrew wasn't moved. This small bit of hope slowly went away as well, because the police knew Andrew wasn't going to change his mind and was just wasting everyone's time. Because they had every right to, the cops wouldn't let Andrew out of jail or make a deal with him. In the end, his plan didn't work out. No matter what, he was stuck in jail. And good job to the detectives for not giving up on this case. Andrew had been out on parole since 2015, but he died in a motorbike accident in August 2017. This meant that the Zimmerman family would no longer hear from him. David, on the other hand, was playing his sick game of cat and mouse with the cops. He kept dropping hints that he had killed Brittany, but he wasn't fully accepting it. He gave answers that were mostly pretty unclear, which is so annoying. The police were pretty sure they had the right person for the job, but they needed more proof. David was supposed to be free in 2021, which made things even worse. The cops had to act quickly before he was free for good. That did happen, though. Finally, on March 20th, 2020, someone was arrested in Brittany's case, and David Carl was the person who was being held. DNA technology made it possible to find a 100% match between David's DNA and the DNA on Brittany's clothes. This meant that David had no reason to run away. When Brittany died, his DNA was found all over her apartment. If he hadn't done anything to cause her death, David finally told the police what he did 12 years after Brittany was attacked and died in a terrible accident. David said that he was in the area getting money from people door to door. At one point, he even broke into a woman's house because the door wasn't locked. He left quickly when he saw the woman inside and being told to leave. Brenton's apartment was his next stop. The door was locked, so David thought no one was home, so he broke in. In fact, in spite of what most people think, nothing bad happened when he met Brittany in the room. When he asked Brittany for money, she didn't have any. Just as he was about to leave, he asked her to go to the bathroom. David was sure that he wasn't going to hurt Brittany at that point. He was allowed to use the bathroom by Brittany. When he came out, he saw Brittany talking on the phone, which made sense since she was probably making that terrible 911 call. Really, can you picture a poor person breaking into your house? While you're not there. It was clear that Brittany was scared and needed help, but that's when David got scared. He didn't want to go to jail again for another crime, so he killed Brittany. He beat her up so badly that Brittany dropped the phone, which is why she couldn't call 911 for help. He then took her to her bedroom and killed her with his naked hands and a kitchen knife he stole from Brittany's kitchen, which is so horrible. David did the unthinkable and then simply walked out of the flat. Yet there is another heartbreaking detail that makes the 911 operator's failure even more infuriating. Remember that Jordan discovered Brittany lying dead on the floor beside the bed, but David claimed he had left her on the bed. This suggests she may have tried to crawl out of the bedroom for help while she was still alive. She lay in her apartment, waiting for help that never came because no police car was dispatched after the call, and Brittany tragically died from her injuries. Thinking about this part of the 911 call only deepens the anger. The operator should have sent someone. Perhaps Brittany's life could have been saved. Even if her death was unavoidable, the case might have been solved sooner if a police officer had been sent to check on her after the call. At the time, David was 56 years old. He initially pleaded not guilty despite confessing, but in 2023, he changed his plea to guilty after what he described as months of soul-searching. For once in his life, David chose to do the right thing. But this man deserves no praise. Remember, he caused all of this pain. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder of 21-year-old Brittany Zimmerman. After the sentencing, Brittany's family summed it up perfectly. "David Carl is nothing more than a worthless piece of skin and a killer," said Jean. The Zimmerman family will spend the rest of their lives without their daughter. Each time they think of Brittany, emotions overwhelm them, knowing she will never graduate college despite her years of hard work. She will never marry Jordan, the love of her life, nor build a future, become a doctor, save lives, or raise children. The Zimmerman family is deeply hurt, yet Brittany's parents and loved ones have found a form of peace, knowing the one responsible will never be captured. To keep Brittany's memory alive in people's thoughts and hearts, the Zimmerman family has carried out many good deeds. In Marshfield, a dog walk-in fundraiser called Paws for Brittany was created in her honor. It raised funds for the Marshfield Area Pet Shelter, MAPS, and was intended to reflect what Brittany herself would have wanted if she were still here. Though she could not personally fulfill these dreams, her family and friends continue to spread the love she carried for everyone, especially animals. In addition, students from Marshfield High School pursuing medicine at the University of Wisconsin-Madison are eligible for the Brittany Zimmerman Memorial Scholarship. This stands as a meaningful way to remember Brittany and everything she represented. Moving on to the next case. Chen Xiaofeng. When Chen Xiaofeng's body was discovered in an arcade of a shopping mall in the summer of 2018, it was not merely the finding of a murder victim. It was the loss of a young woman many people recognized from their phones. A dancer, instructor, and social media celebrity with 500,000 followers, she appeared to have everything working in her favor. As bystanders recorded the scene, treating her death like another viral spectacle, no one could grasp who might have done this to her or for what reason. The reality, however, was that beyond the facade of online stardom, there was far more to her life than what appeared on the internet: the struggles, the anxieties, and the painful truth unseen by others. This is the chilling account of Chen Xiaofeng. Picture gaining 500,000 followers on social media with your dance clips going viral, brands overflowing your DMs, and living the lifestyle countless teenagers fantasize about. That is precisely what occurred for Chen Xiaofeng in 2018. Yet behind her carefully crafted TikTok profile, the 22-year-old dance instructor was facing an unthinkable nightmare. While her fans viewed her smiling and dancing through their screens, no one realized she was trapped within a cycle of dominance and mistreatment. The world could not foresee that this rising star would be savagely killed in broad daylight inside a shopping mall arcade. Chen Xiaofeng's story is not simply another true crime narrative. It stands as a haunting warning of the dangers when the polished, perfect existence displayed online conceals a much darker truth. Born in 1996, into a wealthy household that owned a factory in Sichuan, Xiaofeng's childhood was surrounded by comfort and possibilities. With an elder brother who always protected her, she grew into a gentle and caring character who won the affection of everyone she encountered. Remembered for her kindness, she carried a deep fondness for animals, and her compassion was always extended to those in need. In Chinese tradition, names possess profound meaning, often regarded as prophetic. Her parents selected the name Xiaofeng, which represented skill and artistry, a name that would prove fitting as she matured into a gifted dancer. From an early age, she dedicated herself to dance, exploring every form she encountered. She entered many competitions, securing numerous awards, and soon displayed a natural talent for instructing others. Even while still a student, she supported younger dancers, patiently leading them and refining their techniques. The happiness she felt from seeing them progress nurtured her aspiration of teaching. At only 19 years old, Xiaofeng achieved her dream of becoming a certified dance instructor. Her youth and energy made her especially beloved by her little pupils, generally around 4 or 5 years old. Proud of their daughter's success, her parents assisted her in obtaining an apartment in the city near her place of work. Xiaofeng's teaching career thrived, and she infused her classes with a distinctive energy, combining technical mastery with sincere concern for her students' progress. Her co-workers respected how naturally she bonded with the children, and her lessons were always filled with joy and growth. She was fulfilling her dream, earning her own income, and establishing a reputation as a dedicated teacher. Yet, in early 2017, Xiaofeng's life drastically shifted when she encountered Wu Yidong, a 26-year-old man who would become her first partner. The irony of their names later carried tragedy. While Xiaofeng's name signified skill and talent, Wu's name represented steadiness and safety, qualities he would eventually manipulate for his personal advantage. Though they had studied at the same school years apart, their lives had not intersected until Wu noticed her in a bar one night. Despite being admired by many potential admirers, Xiaofeng had never seriously been involved with anyone before Wu, and her lack of experience would later prove ruinous. She did not possess the awareness to see the warning signs in their relationship from the beginning. Wu's conduct raised concerns among Xiaofeng's relatives and friends. He was jobless and showed no intention of working, insisting that he was too proud to labor for others and make them wealthy. He condescendingly mocked those who held jobs, considering himself above the system he rejected. Though he claimed to own a clothing shop, there was no proof validating that statement. Despite lacking a dependable income, Wu spoiled Xiaofeng with presents, prepared elaborate dishes for her using his culinary training, and took her on costly outings. His early pursuit followed the familiar tactic of manipulation called love bombing, where he smothered her with exaggerated devotion, gifts, and endless avowals that he could not survive without her. For Xiaofeng, experiencing her first romance, the intensity of his attention seemed loving rather than alarming. She had no way to recognize this was the onset of an abusive cycle. Love bombing is usually followed by two harmful stages: devaluation and discard. In the devaluation stage, the abuser starts destroying the pedestal on which they had placed their victim. Wu's affectionate displays soon turned into harsh insults, violent jealousy, and restrictive monitoring of Xiaofeng. He insisted on knowing her location at all times, exploding with fury if she failed to answer his messages quickly. The same man who once showered her with compliments now criticized everything she did, creating a confusing and stressful atmosphere where Xiaofeng felt as if she was always treading on eggshells. When Xiaofeng reached her limit and attempted to leave, Wu reverted to love bombing, sending weeping videos pleading for forgiveness, only to continue the once she returned. This back-and-forth pattern is typical of narcissistic mistreatment, designed to keep the victim destabilized and doubting their own decisions. Wu shifted between treating Xiaofeng as his treasured possession and releasing his fury upon her, establishing a toxic cycle of extreme highs and crushing lows, making it even harder for her to break free. In August 2017, only a few months into their relationship, Xiaofeng's carefully maintained separation between Wu and her family fell apart. Her parents paid an unexpected visit to her apartment while she was working, only to discover Wu asleep in her bed. Rather than welcoming them, Wu simply slammed the bedroom door and kept sleeping for another 2 hours, clearly annoyed that they had disturbed his valuable rest. This became the first impression he made on them. By then, Wu was already residing with Xiaofeng, just 3 months into their relationship. She had attempted to conceal him from her family because she realized his conduct was questionable. Her relatives had seen through him immediately, but they gently expressed it. Xiaofeng, being a tender-hearted person, wanted to believe in the good within people and could not convince herself that Wu might truly be bad. Her parents, equally gentle, told her they respected her decision in a companion and only wished for her happiness. Still, Wu appeared uninterested in establishing a bond with Xiaofeng's family. Instead, he was eager for her to meet his own parents, arranging a visit for the Lunar New Year festivities in February 2018. During the holiday, Wu's parents presented Xiaofeng with a red envelope containing more than 10,000 yuan, the equivalent of an entire month's pay, a generous gesture symbolizing their blessings for the year ahead. This revealed how much Wu's parents wanted to leave a favorable impression on her, appreciating that their son had found someone as talented and kind as Xiaofeng. Yet soon after this warm acceptance into his household, Wu's conduct towards Xiaofeng grew more violent. One morning, following an intense dispute, he pursued her down the street as she was preparing for work, forced her to halt her car, and demanded both her phone and car keys. Terrified, she obeyed, and Wu fled with them, leaving her abandoned and shaken. Imagine being robbed by your own partner. Xiaofeng had to contact her elder brother and pursue Wu to recover her possessions. That was the first occasion Wu encountered Xiaofeng's older brother. At this stage, one might assume Xiaofeng would have chosen to end things with Wu. He had turned into a cruel, parasitic presence, taking from her without giving anything back. He even started joining her on school trips with her dance pupils. Wu possessed no life apart from Xiaofeng. His whole existence centered on monitoring her every action and draining her strength. Yet even with this, Xiaofeng continued returning to him repeatedly. Wu would regain Xiaofeng's affection after each episode using additional manipulative ploys. After every outburst, he would send her sentimental videos of himself weeping and begging forgiveness, insisting he could not live without her and that his life lacked meaning without her love. Since this was her first romance, Xiaofeng lacked the background to recognize these manipulative strategies for what they truly were. Instead, she became ensnared in a cycle of abuse, where powerful intervals of love bombing followed every violent eruption. She kept believing he would transform, just as he vowed in his dramatic apology recordings, and being the compassionate person she was, she trusted there was goodness in him that would eventually appear through her patience and empathy. Gradually, however, Xiaofeng started to accept this was merely false hope. In April of that year, she uncovered Wu's gambling habit. He had accumulated massive debts, adding financial chaos to the increasing reasons she needed to end the relationship. Still, leaving grew steadily harder as his actions became more restrictive and unpredictable. The situation struck its lowest point in May 2018, when Xiaofeng's social media fame began to rise. Wu uploaded a clip of her dancing beside a lake on Douyin, featuring a popular song and graceful hand motions set against the picturesque scenery. The video went viral immediately, gaining 1.8 million likes. What should have been a moment of joy became the beginning of another nightmare. Wu perceived the viral triumph as a money-making chance and seized complete control of the matter. Between May 26th and June 26th, Wu compelled Xiaofeng to create 59 separate videos, each uploaded to his account. He devoted hours to studying trending sounds and dances, securing brand partnerships without her approval and pocketing all of the earnings from her work. Xiaofeng made it clear to Wu that she did not want to become an influencer. She cherished her peaceful life teaching dance and feared how her online visibility could harm her career. Nevertheless, Wu dismissed her worries and would simply notify her of new brand partnerships he had accepted, leaving her with no option but to perform. The account rapidly expanded to nearly 500,000 followers, yet Xiaofeng had no authority over any of it. Wu handled every element of the account, approved all collaborations, and kept every profit. He would tell her, "We've secured more brand deals, so you must film," leaving her feeling cornered and helpless. All across China, young people observed her rise with envy and admiration, crowding her comment sections with messages such as, "You are so lucky and living the dream." They saw a graceful dancer who had apparently mastered the algorithm, going viral and earning money merely by doing what she loved. They imagined her collecting payments from brand deals, delighting in her sudden fame, and experiencing the perfect influencer lifestyle. Yet behind every flawlessly arranged video stood a terrified young woman compelled to perform at command while her abuser seized every cent she earned. Xiaofeng's story exposes the sinister side of social media, how we never truly understand what lies behind those immaculate posts, the polished smiles, and the seemingly effortless accomplishments. As her online presence increased, so did Wu's control over her existence. He began monitoring her activities more intensely and turned increasingly violent when she resisted recording content. In June 2018, while Xiaofeng slept, Wu withdrew 5,000 yen from her bank account without her permission. When she uncovered the theft and tried to expel him from her apartment, he tore the front door off its frame in a fit of fury. Worried for their daughter's safety, Xiaofeng's parents devised a plan to remove her from Wu. Since they owned her apartment, they told her they had to sell it, which meant she would need to return to live with them temporarily. This provided a short break from Wu's control. On July 12, 2018, Xiaofeng formally ended her relationship with him and changed her phone number. Yet he swiftly discovered ways to reach her by using different numbers. His harassment escalated frighteningly when he sent her a video of himself dangling her puppy, a dog he had earlier gifted her as an apology, out of a high-rise window, threatening to end its life if she refused to answer his calls. In the following weeks, Wu's behavior became even more unstable and perilous. He trailed Xiaofeng, appearing wherever she went. During one episode in a park, he rushed at her and her male friend with a knife, fleeing only when she contacted the police. On August 1, 2018, after weeks of rising threats, Wu sent Xiaofeng a stream of terrifying messages at 4:23 p.m. He wrote, "You've done it. You've completely angered me. Let's die together." And 1 minute later added, "You'll go to hell. Just you wait." That evening, as Xiaofeng left work with a companion, Wu pursued their car to a shopping mall. Realizing the danger, Xiaofeng quickly exited her friend's vehicle and rushed toward the busy commercial district, hoping to find security in the crowd. At 8:55 p.m., Wu, wearing a mask to hide his face, caught up with her and dragged her into a game arcade surrounded by claw machines filled with stuffed toys. He cornered her, held her tightly as she screamed for help, and then produced a serrated knife. The attack that followed was savage. Wu stabbed Xiaofeng 16 times, with several wounds reaching as deep as 40 centimeters because of his twisting of the blade. The entire assault lasted only 3 minutes, yet it marked the final moments of Chun Xiaofeng's life. At first, the public's response to her killing leaned toward victim blaming, with some internet users accusing her of being a gold digger who had caused it herself. However, as the true extent of Wu's controlling and exploitative conduct became clear, public opinion shifted dramatically. During the trial, Wu attempted to deflect responsibility, arguing that if Xiaofeng's mother had collected her from work that day, she would still be alive. This heartless statement caused her mother to collapse in the courtroom. The judge recognized Wu's manipulative behavior and sentenced him to death for the deliberate murder of Chun Xiaofeng. Xiaofeng's heartbreaking story stands as a strong reminder of the concealed risks that can come with social media fame and romantic involvement. Her death ignited crucial conversations in China about domestic violence, online exploitation, and the necessity of recognizing red flags in relationships. Today, Xiaofeng is remembered not only for the tragic way her life ended, but also for the radiant, gifted young woman she was, a devoted teacher who influenced countless lives with her passion for dance. Her story continues to function as a lesson about the importance of retaining control over one's social media presence and identifying the signals of abuse. Her death carries essential lessons about protecting privacy online, noticing manipulative behavior, and preserving a reliable support system. It reminds us that achievement on social media can sometimes conceal dangerous realities, and no one should ever feel confined in circumstances where they lose control of their own life and career. Above all, Xiaofeng's story demonstrates that abuse can occur to anyone, regardless of their social standing or accomplishments. It urges us to trust our intuition when something feels wrong, maintain strong ties with family and friends, and seek assistance when we feel endangered. No ambition for fame or success is worth giving up our safety or independence. By telling her story, we commit to striving to prevent similar tragedies and to support influencers in putting their safety first both online and offline. Her memory stands as a poignant reminder that behind every story of social media success, there must be safeguards for the real individual living it. Moving on to the next case. Diane and Alan Johnson. A calm neighborhood in Bellevue, Idaho, was startled awake by the noise of gunfire at 6:20 a.m. on Tuesday, September 2, 2003. Shortly afterward, sirens echoed through the valley as deputies from the Blaine County Sheriff's Office hurried to the residence of Diane and Alan Johnson. Upon entering, they encountered a gory scene. Diane was lying in her bed with a gunshot wound to her head, and Alan was lying lifeless on the floor beside her with a gunshot wound to his chest. Their 16-year-old daughter, Sarah, was unharmed but was sobbing uncontrollably. While detectives assembled the pieces of the clues left behind, they uncovered startling secrets that led to an equally startling conclusion. What had Diane and Alan done to make someone despise them? And how did that result in their tragic deaths? Bellevue, Idaho, is a small, peaceful town in Blaine County. The town's crime rate is lower than the national average, which is why the deaths of Diane and Alan Johnson in 2003 shook the mostly peaceful community. The Blaine County Sheriff's Office received a terrifying 911 call from Kim Richards. Kim reported that Sarah Johnson, her neighbor's 16-year-old daughter, had cried at her door saying her parents, Diane Scott Johnson, 52, and Alan Scott Johnson, 46, had been killed. Immediately, police and emergency responders were dispatched to the location. Officers who arrived entered the house and witnessed a dreadful sight. Diane had been shot in the head and was discovered in her bed. It appeared she had been murdered while sleeping. Blood stained the walls and ceiling above the bed, and a fragment of her skull was on the floor. Alan's body, Diane's husband, was found lying on the floor near her side of the bed. He wore only a towel, and blood pooled on the floor beneath him. At first glance, investigators assumed it was a straightforward case. It seemed like a murder-suicide. Yet as they examined the crime scene more closely, their view rapidly shifted. The noise of running water drew officers toward the bathroom attached to the master bedroom. The shower had been left running. After shutting off the water, police noticed blood spattered across the bathroom wall and a visible bullet hole. The home was thoroughly searched by officers for further evidence. A .264 caliber Winchester rifle, believed to be the murder weapon, was discovered on the floor of the bedroom. 2 kitchen knives were located at the base of the bed where Diane was found dead. On the bed belonging to their son Matt, another knife was recovered. The clues at the scene left police uncertain. The doors had not been locked, which was something only immediate family members would normally know. There were no indications of forced entry. Unlike what might be expected from a robbery gone wrong, the house was not completely ransacked. At the scene, officers asked Sarah what she remembered about the moment she fled to her neighbor's house for help. She explained that she had been asleep when she heard a gunshot. When she reached her parents' bedroom and called out for her mother, she then heard a second shot. Sarah ran immediately to her neighbor's house, seeking help without hesitation. She had not seen the intruder. Kim Richards, the neighbor who made the 911 call, confirmed the account. There was also a guest house on the property that had been rented by Alan's close friend, 45-year-old Mel Spiegel. When police entered the guest house, they discovered an item of evidence implicating possible suspects. The scope from the same rifle located earlier at the crime scene, which was lying on the bed. However, Mel himself was missing. His sudden disappearance made him a potential suspect to investigators. Sergeant Walt Femling, the officer leading the investigation, instructed everyone to stay clear of the entire property. He further ordered police not to permit the garbage truck to remove any trash containers from the premises. Investigators considered the possibility that Mel may have killed Alan and Diane in a fit of rage after a confrontation. While the forensic team examined this theory, they searched the trash cans and uncovered more incriminating material inside. They retrieved a pink towel that had been wrapped up. Inside the towel, investigators found a latex glove, a single brown leather glove identical to the one discovered in the Johnsons' bedroom, and .25 caliber ammunition. All evidence was documented and forwarded for DNA analysis. While police continued to work through their theory, it became evident that the person responsible for the killings knew both that the doors were unlocked and that garbage collection occurred on a specific day. The killer might have disposed of the incriminating items before fleeing from the crime scene. Detectives decided it was time to track down Mel Spiegel. Only a few hours after the double homicide, sheriff's deputies learned that Mel Spiegel had been located in Boise, Idaho. Mel consented to speak with investigators, and they arranged to meet him at the Boise Police Department. Detectives questioned Mel regarding his whereabouts that morning. Mel explained that he had spent the weekend with his family and intended to return to Bellevue in a week. When officers contacted Mel's relatives, they corroborated his account. Investigators also questioned him about his relationship with Alan and Diane. He told police that he had rented the guest house from the couple for many years and maintained a warm and friendly relationship with them. When questioned about the firearm used in the murders, Mel admitted that it belonged to him, but claimed he had stored it in his closet before leaving for Boise that weekend. Investigators then asked Mel to identify anyone he believed might have been hostile toward the couple. Mel explained that Alan and Diane had been increasingly concerned about their daughter, Sarah. Her new boyfriend was Bruno Santos, a 19-year-old young man. Mel had heard that Bruno was living in the country illegally and was earning money by selling drugs. For police, This seemed somewhat far-fetched, but Mel advised them to speak with other relatives. That is precisely what the investigators did, and they started piecing together the history of the Johnson family. The couple had first met in the early 1980s. Before her relationship with Alan, Diane had been involved with someone else and had a son named Matt, who was only 2 years old. Alan accepted Matt as his own child after marrying Diane in 1983. In time, they had a daughter, Sarah Marie Johnson. They moved into a beautiful home in the tranquil town of Bellevue, Idaho. On January 25, 1987, Alan and Diane became co-owners of a gardening business in Bellevue. Diane also worked as a tax collector. Together, they built a wonderful home for their 2 children and seemed to be a devoted family. They were also well known throughout the neighborhood, as Alan enjoyed trap shooting, a pastime many in the community shared. By 2003, outsiders believed that everything appeared normal. Matt, who was 22 years old at that time, was attending the University of Idaho in Moscow, Idaho. At school, Sarah excelled academically and also played on her volleyball team. Alan cherished her deeply as well. Yet detectives were about to uncover underlying problems within the family that had been developing for some time. With Mel no longer a likely suspect, investigators followed his advice and returned to Bellevue to speak with relatives. Like most others, the Johnsons were thought of as a cherished and joyful family. Their son Matt, who had just returned from college, along with Diane's sister Linda and her husband Jim Vavel, were interviewed by police. All 3 reported that family life had seemed happy and ordinary until Sarah began dating Bruno Santos. Jim, Linda, and Matt all agreed that Sarah's involvement with Bruno had stirred significant conflict within the household. Tensions in the family had escalated during the months leading up to the killings, but Sarah, being a teenage girl, naturally defied her parents' restrictions. Sarah refused to obey her parents when they told her she was not allowed to see Bruno anymore. Meanwhile, Jim informed the police of something that could have given Bruno a motive to kill Diane and Alan. Just a few days before the murders, Alan and Diane had discovered that Sarah had lied about spending the night at a girlfriend's house. In truth, she had spent the night with Bruno. Alan had called Jim to tell him about it. Wanting to confront Bruno, Alan asked Jim to join him. Jim recounted to investigators that Alan had been furious and had threatened to report Bruno to the police for assaulting Sarah because of her young age. With such a serious accusation, Bruno could have faced deportation to his home country. After detectives heard Jim's statement, they believed Bruno had a sufficient motive to murder the Johnsons. It was now time to question Bruno Santos. County officers already knew of Bruno because he had dropped out of high school and had a history of minor drug-related offenses. When he was brought in for interrogation, he became hostile and argumentative with police. He acted arrogant and difficult to manage. Investigators later stated that during questioning, he told them he had proposed to Sarah and that she had accepted. Detectives believed he mentioned this to demonstrate his love for Sarah and to insist that he would never do anything to damage their relationship. When asked about his whereabouts on the morning of the killings, Bruno claimed he had been sleeping on the couch at home. He directed police to confirm this with his mother, who verified that he had been at home with her. For investigators, however, this did not serve as a solid alibi. Bruno's response made it apparent to police that he disliked Alan and Diane when they questioned him about them. Back at the Johnson residence, forensic teams combed through the entire property, searching for evidence. They used ultraviolet light in every room to detect blood or other traces that might indicate how the killer had escaped. During the search of Sarah's room, they discovered blood and bone fragments on the wall. This discovery made the shooting appear even more unusual. The blood and bone were sent to the laboratory for testing. Because of this evidence, investigators began doubting whether Sarah was being truthful about what she had claimed to have seen that morning. While searching her room, police also located a brown leather glove, providing still more incriminating evidence. The same glove that had been discovered in the trash was linked to a key for the guest house, though it had not been used. In Sarah's room, .264 caliber shells were also uncovered. Tissue was found stuck to one of the unused shells, which may have come from the killer's glove while attempting to conceal evidence. This, too, was forwarded to detectives for analysis. At this point, investigators suspected Bruno might have murdered Sarah's parents and then gone to her in order to dispose of the incriminating material. Police served a search warrant on Bruno and his mother, allowing them to collect evidence from their residence. His shoes and all clothing worn that day were seized for testing. His fingerprints were also taken and compared to those recovered at the crime scene. Bruno was transported to the hospital, where officers obtained a DNA sample for analysis. Additionally, hair samples and scrapings from his hands were collected as evidence. Bruno was now considered the primary suspect in the murders of Alan and Diane Johnson. Yet investigators soon received new information that would completely alter the course of the inquiry. The clothing and shoes seized from Bruno were thoroughly examined, but forensic specialists failed to detect any traces of Diane's or Alan's blood. No DNA, hair, or fingerprints tied to him were located near the victims' bodies. There was likewise no physical evidence proving Bruno had been inside the couple's bedroom. Tests conducted on the gloves and bathrobe also yielded no conclusive results. Detectives were left baffled. Many still believed Bruno had the strongest motive to kill Alan and Diane. Nevertheless, without physical evidence linking Bruno to the crime scene, police began to consider that his story might be truthful. Ultimately, Bruno was eliminated as a suspect in the case. Investigators then turned their focus elsewhere as they examined the situation more carefully. Sarah's relatives and friends were questioned more thoroughly about her home life and personal behavior. What emerged was that Sarah had been using drugs and that her relationship with her parents was, at best, turbulent. Relatives indicated they had not paid much attention to her conduct, assuming it was typical teenage behavior. They believed Sarah was simply at the age when many children begin rebelling against parents and testing boundaries. Yet her Aunt Linda became increasingly doubtful of her niece's actions. She told police that Sarah was not exhibiting the normal stages of grief. Cindy said Sarah was more interested in going back to school and hanging out with her friends than in taking time to deal with the deaths of both her parents. The police then talked to some of Sarah's friends and asked them about how she had been acting since her parents died. All of them agreed that Sarah didn't seem to care about the killings. Also, they told the police that she seemed more interested in getting her nails painted. One thing that stood out to them was that Sarah cared more about Bruno after he was found guilty. They thought it was strange that Sarah was worried about the person she thought killed her parents instead of angry. The investigators didn't want to believe where their thoughts were taking them, because it was too bad to think about. However, they had no choice but to look into Sarah as a possible lead. Johnson's house was still a crime scene, and now Sarah's room was being looked at as a second possible location. At this point, investigators at the scene were wondering how the blood had spread so far. Someone who knows a lot about guns was called to the house to look more closely at the spatter pattern. Based on how the gun expert saw it, both bedroom doors were open at the time of the shooting, going from Alan and Diane's room to Sarah's. Also, plumbers were called to the scene because one of the bathroom toilets was stated to be clogged. A shower cap seemed to be the cause of the clog. The police chose to talk to Linda, Matt, and Mel Spiegel about some of the proof they had found. Matt and Linda both agreed that Sarah owned the pink gown. Mel said Sarah did have a key to the guest house, and that she helped clean it up a lot. He also told the police that Sarah knew about the gun that was kept in the room. Now investigators had to connect Sarah to all the evidence. But that would be hard because witnesses said Sarah didn't have any blood on her when she ran to a neighbor's house to beg for help the morning of the mass killings. And forensics experts agreed with this because they used luminol to look for blood on Sarah's clothes and didn't find any. The clothes Sarah had been wearing in the morning were taken away by investigators and tested. At the same time, police wanted to talk to Sarah again, to see if her story had changed since they last saw her. Sarah was called in for another interview by the police. She had been with her uncle and aunt. There were some small problems with Sarah's story. The detectives found that she had changed her story at least 5 times. That she was asleep and woke up to the sound of a gunshot is what some have said. She said in another that she was awake when she heard the first blast. She changed her story again and said she was outside her parents' bedroom when the second shot was fired. The first time she told police she was still in her room when she heard the second shot. At the time of the killing, Sarah also couldn't remember if the door to her parents' room was open or closed. When asking Sarah, the police kept calm so that she wouldn't figure out what they were thinking. Both bedroom doors were open, which was already known to them. That was the only way to explain the blood on Sarah's bedroom wall. As part of the probe to clear her name, Sarah was asked to give DNA, hair, and hand scrapings. All of these were sent to the lab to be tested. The top and bottom of Sarah's pajamas that she wore the morning of the murders were sent to the lab so that forensic expert, Bod and Gert, could test them. And Gert looked at the front of the robe through a powerful microscope and saw no signs of blood. But on the back of the clothing, he saw patterns of fast-moving blood splatter. On the inside of the robe, he also saw blue cotton fibers and green paint spots that matched Sarah's shirt from that morning. But the smoking gun moment wasn't here yet. The lab results also showed that Sarah's DNA was on the inside of the rubber glove and on both sets of brown leather gloves that had gunpowder on them. The gloves and robe had blood from both Alan and Diane on them. This was more than enough for police to arrest Sarah and charge her with killing Alan and Diane Johnson. Sarah Johnson was charged with killing her parents, Alan and Diane Johnson, on October 29, 2003. Without bail, she was held at the Blaine County Jail until her hearing. The story of a young girl killing her parents made national news and was a big deal in the media. Investigators and lawyers had to come up with a strong case that showed Sarah had the intent and skills to commit such a horrible crime. Using what family and friends of Sarah and her parents had to say, they began to piece together a strange story about a girl in love. Since Sarah began dating Bruno, her parents disapproved of the relationship. Sarah soon started acting out like many teenagers and sneaking around behind their backs. However, only a few days before the murders, Sarah was pushed over the edge. Her parents believed she was spending the night with a friend, but in truth, she had been with Bruno. Alan's threats to press charges of assault against Bruno and have him deported to Mexico drove her into a rage. Prosecutors and investigators believed this was the moment Sarah devised the plan to murder her parents, so she could be with Bruno. Sarah thought her plan was flawless because she enjoyed thrillers and true crime stories. On the morning of the murders, she rose early and went to the guest house to retrieve the gun. She dressed herself in rubber gloves, leather gloves, a shower cap to keep blood off her hair, and wore her bathrobe backward to protect her clothing. Sarah then entered her parents' bedroom. She shot Diane in the head while she was asleep, just as Alan entered the shower. When Alan called out, Sarah shot him in the chest as he stepped out of the bathroom. After killing her parents, she staged the scene by placing knives in their bed to make it appear as though an intruder had committed the crime. She then placed the incriminating evidence into trash bags and discarded them, believing the garbage would be collected before police discovered anything. But her plan failed. She had not accounted for the evidence that would be discovered in her room or the shower cap that became lodged in the pipes. There was overwhelming evidence against Sarah, and the time for her trial arrived. 2 years after the murders, in February 2005, 18-year-old Sarah Johnson stood trial for the deaths of her parents. Her defense attorneys argued she was innocent and that the killings had been carried out by an intruder. The prosecution, however, was fully prepared. They presented the court with the physical evidence recovered from the crime scene, along with testimony from Sarah's relatives and friends describing her unusual behavior following the deaths of her parents. The most damaging testimony came from Bruno Santos. Not only did he attempt to clear himself of suspicion during the trial, but he also provided the jury with insight into Sarah's mental state before the killings. In court, Bruno testified that he and Sarah had agreed to marry. Sarah had even told him that they could live happily with only each other in a large, beautiful home. Bruno also testified before the judge that Sarah frequently spoke about how much she despised her father and intended to kill him. After 5 weeks of listening to arguments, reviewing evidence, and learning details from the crime scene, the jury reached its verdict. On March 16, 2005, Sarah, then 18 years old, was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. Since her conviction, Sarah has made several attempts to have her life sentence reduced, but all of her petitions have been denied, and she remains incarcerated. Following Sarah's sentencing, her surviving relatives publicly expressed their feelings about her actions. The family was left shattered by the deaths of Alan and Diane. Most people believed Sarah was guilty and deserved punishment. Matt, her brother, stated that Sarah showed no remorse for killing their parents. He suggested that if given another chance, she would kill again in order to escape capture. During Sarah's sentencing, Diane's mother, Pat Dishman, addressed her directly. Her grandmother told her that, although the family still loved her, her actions had destroyed them. Lynn Morrell, Alan's sister, described Sarah as spoiled and disturbed, saying she was capable of killing again. She urged the judge to ensure Sarah would never be released from prison, even if the possibility arose. This concludes the case. The turns in this story were truly astonishing, with every revelation proving more shocking than the last. It demonstrates that real life can often be far stranger than anything we can imagine. Moving on to the next case. Hildur. This is the crime that shocked the world's most peaceful country. Don't just take my word for it. Iceland is ranked as the most peaceful nation on Earth with an exceptionally low crime rate, according to the 2025 Global Peace Index. That is exactly why this case is so disturbing. No one could have anticipated the level of brutality displayed that day. The killer also left behind subtle traces. Looking back, the details that once seemed insignificant were actually breadcrumbs leading to something much darker. Let me take you back to 2010. It is August 15th in Reykjavik, Iceland, and a 23-year-old woman named Hildur is about to make a life-changing discovery. The night before had been, in a way, eventful. That morning, she went to her fiancé's home. The pair were well known in the area and shared a close relationship. Using her key to enter, she came upon a sight at the top of the stairs that would haunt her forever. Her fiancé, 37-year-old Hannes Thor Helgason, lay completely naked and covered in blood. His body bore 19 stab wounds and deep cuts. Many first responders agreed it was the most horrific crime scene they had ever encountered, though certain details remained puzzling. But let's rewind. How did events build up to this? The evening before, Saturday, August 14th, had started out as nothing unusual. Hildur was taken by Hannes to Vogur for a family gathering. Around 2 in the morning, Hannes dropped Hildur off in downtown Reykjavik so she could continue her night out with some friends. Hildur stayed out and went bar hopping with her group, visiting several spots, including the popular Café Amsterdam, while Hannes drove home, wanting only to sleep. This is where things began to turn strange. The next morning, Hildur had no memory of what had happened. At 11 a.m., she woke up in an unfamiliar place. As her mind cleared, she realized she was in the home of a childhood friend. She had no recollection of how she had gotten there, only that she had been out with one of her pals. Though she insisted she had consumed just 2 drinks the night before, she began to wonder if she might have been drugged. And if she had been drugged, what else could have happened? It was a thought she did not want to entertain. She asked her friend why he had brought her to his home instead of driving her back. Her question startled him. He explained that he had been drinking himself and didn't want to risk a long drive while intoxicated. That was why he chose to take her to his place rather than her fiancé's. He assured her that nothing had happened between them. In fact, she had been so drunk that he had to hold her up to get her inside. Hildur panicked at the story. She had not gone home and had instead stayed overnight at another man's residence, terrified of what her fiancé might think. Afraid he would be angry, she called him repeatedly, but he never answered. With rising dread, she decided she needed to go to him immediately, asking the same friend to drive her there. He even offered to accompany her inside, hoping to ease any tension and prevent misunderstandings between her and her fiancé. Hildur refused, saying that if her fiancé saw her arriving with her friend, it would only make matters worse. She could never have imagined that upon walking into the house, she would find her devoted fiancé so brutally stabbed, nearly killed. Forensic evidence showed that Hannes had been attacked while asleep. His body was found in the corridor of his bedroom. He had sustained 19 stab wounds, most of them to his hands, arms, face, back, and neck. The defensive injuries told the story of a man who awoke to an attack and fought desperately for his life. The wounds revealed the sheer rage and hatred with which the crime was carried out. One door was discovered unlocked, yet there were no signs of forced entry. Investigators believed no one else had been in the house at the time, and the perpetrator most likely entered through that unlocked door. When the news spread, Iceland was left in shock. The investigation involved over 40 police officers, and every major media outlet covered what would become one of the most dramatic cases in the nation's history. The pressing question was, who could have done this? To find answers, police began delving into Hannes' past. On the surface, he seemed like a highly successful man. He owned several KFC restaurants in Lithuania and served as managing director of his father's confectionery company, Goa. By all accounts, he was well-liked. No one had a bad word to say about him, and many described him as a genuinely kind person, always willing to lend a hand to friends from all walks of life. However, investigators soon uncovered that not everyone close to Hannes was as clean as he seemed. The first suspect surfaced quickly. Hannes was said to be afraid of a debt collector. In a small country like Iceland, debt collection often became personal, and this man was known for being aggressive. Another name emerged as well, a man with whom Hannes had a major financial dispute and a heated argument tied to an international business deal. Then there were his ties to Lithuania. He had recently returned from there, where he had a child from a previous relationship. Because he lived in Iceland, he rarely had time to see his own son. Interest deepened when reports surfaced that one of his Lithuanian business associates had recently been arrested for drug possession. Suddenly, the case seemed much bigger. This was no random stabbing. Could Hannes have been caught up in something far more dangerous, such as drug cartels? Speculation ran wild as Icelandic media struggled to find solid details. News outlets circulated a wide variety of claims, much of it guesswork. While many thought the case was stalling, police were in fact working quietly and relentlessly behind the scenes, combing through all of Hannes' phone and computer data around the clock. At the crime scene, one piece of evidence stood out: a bloody shoe print found by the forensic team near Hannes' bed. After photographing it, they sent it abroad for testing. On August 25th, a call came in from German police. They identified the shoe print as belonging to an Adidas Baroque sneaker, a model of which only a small number were available in Iceland. Moreover, this specific pair had been purchased locally. Then came the killer's familiarity with the property. Investigators believed the perpetrator knew Hannes' house and the layout of the bedroom. It seemed likely they had been inside before. The profile of the murderer was then revised to someone with a close personal connection to Hannes. At this stage, they discovered a YouTube video. By 2010, YouTube had only been around for 5 years. It seemed almost unthinkable that someone would post evidence of their obsession online before committing such a brutal act. Yet the video had been uploaded by someone very familiar to Hildur, Hannes' fiancée, more than a year before the murder. It was her childhood friend, Gunnar runner Sigurd Thorson, the very same friend at whose house she had woken up without memory, and the one who drove her home that night. I'll repeat for you what Gunnar said in that video. "Hello, Hildur is the subject of this video. Hildur is a girl I've been spending almost every weekend with, and she is unquestionably the most remarkable person I've ever met. I say that with some difficulty because I'm really shy. Now that I've put this love confession online, it may sound a little sweet, but keep listening. Simply being with her brought me immense joy. That was all I needed. And because I think I've fallen in love with you, this is for you. I know this will probably be hard for you. You seem to have had trouble with men before. The whole White Knight zone is wrapped up in the message. It's as if I'm the only one who can truly see her, understand her, and accept her. That's what I mean. I know you're getting over a rather unhappy situation with an ex. I know you don't like to talk about it, but I just want to say I'm here for you. All of this is troubling because Hildur was happily in a relationship with Hannes. In Gunnar's mind, however, he had built an entire fantasy in which he was the only one who could save her. His final words to clear the air were, "And I'll tell you that I am completely sober, so I have no excuse to deny this. I love you." This was not a sweet declaration of love, it was a manifesto of possession. At first, many people online dismissed Gunnar's video as a harmless but awkward stunt. Hildur, however, recognized it for what it truly was. She made it very clear to him that she was happy with Hannes and did not feel the same way about him. After that, she cut off communication with Gunnar. Eventually, he apologized, and the two resumed their friendship. What Hildur didn't realize was that Gunnar's obsession hadn't gone away. It had simply gone underground. Born on March 15, 1987, Gunnar had endured a traumatic event that would shape the rest of his life. When he was just 9 years old, his father killed himself with a gun in front of Gunnar and other family members. The trauma left him socially isolated for most of his life, unwilling to fully accept or acknowledge his father's death. In the dream world he lived in, his father was still alive and would one day return. Gunnar remained withdrawn until he reconnected with Hildur, whom he had first met in primary school. They started as friends, drifted apart, and later grew close again as adults, seeing each other more often. Gunnar's fascination began at that point, but once more Gunnar was unable to accept the fact that Hildur was dating Hannes. When Gunnar started that YouTube channel and posted the confession video on March 25, 2009, over a year prior to the crime, he thought this was it. But something inside him just exploded when Hildur turned him away. Not because he disliked Gunnar, but because he was rescuing Hildur from her one true love. He started reenacting this revenge in his own imagination over and over again. In the present, Gunnar has been taken in by the police to be questioned. At first, Gunnar denied any involvement, but when they inspected the car, they discovered crimson stain remnants in the trunk. But his actions seemed strange to the investigators. He asked the guard what evidence the police had against him once the investigators had left the room. Even though he knew Hannes and they were partially buddies, he was said to be emotionless, to have no sorrow or sorrow for him. He was detained by the police for 24 hours at the time, but they were forced to release him since there was insufficient proof. Now though, do you recall the shoe print? And when authorities compared that bloody shoe print to the shoe that was taken from Gunnar after his arrest, they found a perfect match, which is reminiscent of a spooky twisted Cinderella tale. To the unaided eye, his shoes seemed clean. However, the soles of it gleamed when luminol was sprayed, proving that he had stepped in blood and that he had to clean the shoes thereafter. In light of this evidence, Gunnar confessed after his second arrest. And perhaps even more unsettling than the crime itself was what he disclosed. He claimed that the speed at which he was implicated startled him. Since that YouTube video, Gunnar has been preparing something for months. He believed he had exercised caution. In order to learn how to evade detection, he watched crime shows, particularly CSI. Interrogation revealed his genuine mentality. Hildur was dear to me. I was meant to have her with me. It was not intended for her to be with him. It wasn't love. It was possession. The preparation was thorough and systematic. Gunnar took a balaclava, a knife, and latex gloves from his car's trunk. He also used trash bags to make shoe covers, which was a CSI-inspired concept. Why, therefore, did his tracks remain? Well, as he walked, the bag ripped. And just how did he commit this crime? He parked at a convenience store at around midnight, and then strolled around the neighborhood with his knife in hand, contemplating his next move. It was not the first instance. Gunnar acknowledged that he had considered killing Hannes for a long time, but had always refrained. But each time he planned more thoroughly, and he stopped himself once more that evening. He went downtown and had a drink instead of carrying it out. This is where it gets twisted, though. He ultimately had another drink with Hildur, the woman he was infatuated with. Something sinister clicked inside him because he took her back to his apartment after she became intoxicated. He saw that now was the ideal moment. This was destined to happen. All this time he kept thinking about what he had planned. And the truth came at this time. Like Dexter and his kill kit, he realized he had everything prepared in his car. Consequently, this had to be the ideal time. As a result, Gunnar drove to Hannes' house when Hildur was dying there. He put on a large coat, a sheepskin cap, and rubber gloves. With his knife in hand, he paced the final few steps. However, he was aware that the side door was always unlocked and that the moment had arrived. He entered the bedroom where Hannes was sleeping by himself in this manner. Gunnar claimed that before attacking, he stood over Hannes for a few minutes, seeing him sleep for a few minutes. He claimed that he had been waiting for someone to stop him, anyone, even God, but that nobody had shown up. Gunnar believed that this was predestined, that he had made his decision and that fate had chosen for him. He repeatedly stabbed Hannes in the hands, back, and chest during the assault, causing the knife to pierce his kidneys, lungs, and heart. To be sure, he then gave him a few more stabs. Following the vicious assault, Gunnar rushed outside, removed his gloves, coat, and shoe covers, placed them all in a plastic bag with the knife, and tossed it into the harbor. Hildur was still asleep when he drove home. One of the most unsettling details is this. Before falling asleep on the couch, he gave Hildur a kiss on the lips. He sacrificed everything for her, and now she was his. This is a psychotic episode of some sort. I'm not even sure what it's comparable to. This is a genuine story that is a mix of American Psycho and something else entirely. When word leaked out the following evening that Hannes had been located, Gunnar's reaction was startlingly indifferent. He just started playing video games as a diversion after sending an email to work, claiming to be unwell. When police questioned him about his feelings for Hannes, Gunnar claimed that although Hannes was a good man, he wanted to get rid of him because he was jealous. That's what he said. That is all there is to it. He had no hatred for Hannes. He simply viewed him as a barrier. Hildur was shocked to hear the confession and went down in tears. She had known this person since elementary school. Very lonely, innocent, but decent guy, she famously said at the time. The sad thing about this whole affair is that Hannes felt sorry for Gunnar because he was aware of his fixation with his fiancée. To help Gunnar feel less alone, he had even proposed that he spend time with them. Because he felt terrible for Gunnar, Hannes was always kind to him. As a result, this was a full betrayal of not just one, but two persons. When the matter finally went to trial, Gunnar's mental health became the main topic of discussion. Was there a defense of any sort to explain what had occurred? In fact, Gunnar's trauma from witnessing his father harm himself in public was highlighted by the defense, who argued that it made him vulnerable and immature, destabilizing his mental health. They claimed he lacked sound judgment, attributing his actions to what they called lovesickness and a dual personality disorder. A mental evaluation diagnosed him with schizophrenia. Gunnar was committed to a mental institution on March 1, 2011, after being found not guilty by reason of insanity. However, Hannes's family was outraged. The idea that Hannes's life was treated as worthless while a cold-blooded murderer was allowed to plan his crime for nearly a year was completely unacceptable to them. The prosecution refused to relent and appealed to the Supreme Court of Iceland. On October 13, 2011, the ruling was overturned. Gunnar was found guilty and sentenced to 16 years in prison. The Supreme Court's reasoning was pivotal. Despite his mental disorder, Gunnar had maintained control over his actions. Months of careful planning demonstrated his awareness of the consequences. Moreover, his obsessive impulses toward Hildur had disappeared by the time of the first trial. If his actions were truly driven by lovesickness, those feelings would have persisted. Gunnar's detailed preparation and the time he invested revealed his resolute intent to destroy Hannes. Hannes Helgeson's family shares this conviction. The story did not end there. Gunnar once again attracted media attention in Iceland in July 2019. He was granted supervised release despite not serving the standard 2/3 of his sentence. How did people find out? Because he had created a Tinder account. Yes, a convicted murderer was back on dating apps. Gunnar now works with the Icelandic Red Cross and lives in a halfway house under supervision. He has never returned to YouTube and refuses to give interviews. Tragically, Hannes Thor Helgeson's life ended at just 37 years old. A successful businessman, a devoted fiancé, and a kind man generous enough to befriend the very person who would ultimately betray him. And aside from the 2 drinks Hildur reportedly had, which is doubtful, there was no evidence that she was intoxicated. She was likely drugged, as she slept soundly through the entire crime, but no proof of this has ever been found. Sadly, this true crime story leaves behind a grim message. Childhood trauma may play a role, but at its core, it was obsession. And when left unchecked, obsession can sometimes spiral into horrifying consequences that devastate innocent lives. Gunnar's YouTube video was not a love confession. It was a digital breadcrumb trail that led directly to a brutal crime. Moving on to the next case. Louise Coker. On the night of October 25, 2016, the peaceful inhabitants of a small South African village were shocked when Louise Coker rushed out of her house in distress, carrying her 3-year-old daughter in her arms. She was screaming for assistance, insisting that her daughter had suddenly become unconscious. At that time, nobody could have imagined this event would initiate an inquiry that revealed disturbing realities about a family's concealed existence behind closed doors. Louise had petitioned for divorce from Christo Vandermeer in 2014, only a year after their daughter was born. Her choice was driven by growing threats and violent outbursts from her husband. Once a gentle and devoted auto mechanic, Christo had changed into a man inclined toward reckless conduct, even endangering her life. This conduct forced Louise to pursue a restraining order through the legal system. Before her life with Christo descended into disorder, she believed she had at last discovered the right companion. She became acquainted with Christo following a stormy separation from her first husband, Freddie. That union as well had brought her no joy. When Christo came into her world, he appeared to be everything Freddie was not. Industrious, reliable, and stable. Their rapid romance quickly resulted in marriage, and they welcomed their first child, a son named Johan. 2 years afterward, their daughter Poppy was born. Yet Louise's life had been scarred by hardship well before these circumstances. In 1984, when she was 10 years old, she suffered the heartbreaking death of her father, with whom she had shared an especially strong connection. His death was a devastating shock. Shortly after, Louise's mother remarried, but her new spouse brought conflict into their household. This man brought hostility and abuse into the family, constantly demeaning and undermining everyone around him. He was infamous for his anger and would frequently turn to physical violence to maintain control. The years Louise spent living under his authority left a permanent scar on her, creating a deep feeling of inadequacy and uncertainty. When Louise finally departed from her childhood home, she was resolute about seeking freedom at any cost. Her first marriage was a hasty choice, one that resulted in more suffering than comfort. After leaving Freddie, she believed Christo would be her new beginning. Yet this next marriage turned out equally destructive. What made Christo's decline especially tragic was that it appeared to happen alongside the birth of their children. Their daughter Poppy, born in 2013, quickly became the focus of attention for everyone familiar with the family. Her golden hair and vivid blue eyes attracted universal admiration. However, what might have been an ideal family existence soon disintegrated into something much darker. By the point Louise sought divorce, she realized she could not permit the nightmares of her own childhood to be relived. She had grown up suffering hostility and constant degradation, and she was determined to shield her children from an identical outcome. In 2015, Cobus Camar moved to Orania, seeking a new beginning after multiple unsuccessful marriages. The tight-knit community provided him with a position at a neighborhood supermarket where Louise Coker was already working. It was there their lives intersected. At first sight, Cobus appeared to be an ordinary man, yet his past, filled with divorces and repeated disputes, caused unease. His ex-wives depicted him as a man inclined toward violent tendencies, and his connection with his children was said to be limited to court-ordered financial assistance. At this stage, Louise had already established herself in Orania, though she was still adapting to her new lifestyle. She was occupied with arranging her household and taking care of her two children, Johan and Poppy, along with her 14-year-old stepdaughter, Marissa. Marissa, who had moved in with Louise after a prolonged legal dispute, assumed many of the household duties, enabling Louise to concentrate on her job. The teenager became a caregiver for her younger siblings, serving as a second mother to them. In spite of the hardships, the family slowly achieved a measure of stability. Court rulings had imposed strict restrictions on Christo's contact with his family. He was granted supervised visits with Johan and Poppy 3 times per month, always overseen by a social worker. He was also allowed weekly phone conversations with his son and daughter, the majority of which were recorded. To onlookers, he gave the impression of being a committed father, yet Louise insisted this was nothing more than a facade. She regarded him as a danger to her household and dreaded a recurrence of earlier episodes. The Orania community had embraced Louise warmly. Members of the Dutch Reformed Church assisted her in obtaining housing and employment. Louise believed this small, close-knit town, inhabited by just over 1,000 individuals, would be the ideal place to restore her life and put behind years of misery and conflict. Famous for its minimal crime levels, Orania's residents, mostly descended from Dutch, German, and French settlers, worked collectively to maintain a secure and supportive setting. But Louise's newly found tranquility started to crumble once Cobus entered her world. Despite his problematic past, he swiftly embedded himself into her circle of acquaintances and became a regular visitor to her house. Outwardly, his actions appeared innocent, yet murmurs regarding his history began spreading, leading some to doubt how safe his presence truly was. Alarm grew when Johan began showing strange behavior at preschool. Teachers observed that the boy avoided social interaction, frequently hiding and showing hesitation about returning home at the day's end. This triggered concern, particularly since both Johan and Poppy seemed visibly uneasy at the thought of leaving with their family. Cobus, who regularly arrived to collect them, made a negative impression on the preschool staff. His harsh and irritable attitude toward the children could not be overlooked. These observations caused teachers to suspect that something was seriously wrong within Louise and Cobus' household. The problems began right after Louise and Cobus' wedding on November 14, 2015. Only one day following the registration of their marriage, Cobus demanded that Marissa, Louise's 14-year-old stepdaughter, leave their residence. She was suddenly placed on a bus to her father. This choice was a shock to Johan and Poppy, who were profoundly bonded with their older sister. Marissa had cared for them, given them affection, and her absence was a deeply traumatic event for them. They could not grasp why their cherished sister was gone, while her role was replaced by someone showing no desire to bond with them. After Marissa's removal, Johan and Poppy became irritable, withdrawn, and began to fall sick more often. These changes matched the period when they began daycare, since neither Louise nor Cobus could supervise them at home anymore because of work. The daycare staff started detecting strange conduct in Johann. At times his responses were sluggish, almost as if he were under the influence of sedatives. When questioned about the boy's state, his parents offered unclear replies, or at times joked about it. Although these suspicions were never verified, the children's behavior continued to alarm observers. Poppy, the younger of the siblings, started crying more frequently, and Johann often concealed himself in hidden places, especially when Cobus arrived to collect them. Teachers observed that the siblings appeared frightened to return home, yet they were unable to intervene directly. Cobus himself frequently seemed impatient and annoyed, particularly whenever the children cried or acted lively. Louise, in contrast, appeared detached, weary, and absorbed in her work which, according to the daycare personnel, likely kept her from recognizing the situation. The family's difficulties continued to intensify. Cobus refused to form a bond with the children, and his treatment of them became increasingly cold and distant. At the same time, Louise started to realize that her expectations for a new life with him were collapsing. At that moment, however, she was unaware of the consequences she was about to encounter. The first significant turning point occurred when Poppy ceased attending daycare. This happened after staff began questioning the bruises that appeared regularly on her body. Despite her speech limitations, the little girl attempted to explain what was taking place at home, but her explanations were confused and unclear. Staff observed that the bruises often appeared in strange locations, such as on her ears or the inner parts of her arms, areas not usually linked to accidental harm. Louise and Cobus consistently reassured them that the bruises came from active play, insisting that Johann frequently pushed his sister and that she, being clumsy, often stumbled and injured herself. By this stage, Johann was still enrolled at daycare, yet his behavior was raising growing alarm. The boy refused to remove his heavy clothing, even in the scorching summer heat. He would arrive dressed in a jacket and trousers, regardless of the temperature. Caregivers tried to persuade him to change into lighter clothing, but Johann strongly resisted and repeatedly said that his parents would be angry if he removed his clothes. When the caregivers finally decided to check under his clothes, they found bruises. After this incident, Louise and Cobus stopped bringing Johann to daycare, claiming he was difficult to manage. Around the same time, Louise began stating that Johann was acting aggressively toward his sister. She explained his absence by suggesting he couldn't control his emotions and could pose a danger to others. The daycare staff noticed that this withdrawal happened right after they began asking questions about Johann's unusual condition. They suspected that the parents might have pulled him out to avoid further scrutiny. Poppy often woke up crying at night, trying to muffle her sobs so as not to attract attention, but her quiet weeping could be heard through the thin walls. A neighbor recalled that this happened nearly every night. The parents appeared to completely ignore her tears. When they did intervene, it was only to shout harshly at her to stop crying. Over time, the neighbor noticed that Poppy's nightly crying episodes were accompanied by other alarming signs that could not be ignored. One incident that stood out to the neighbor involved seeing Poppy with her leg in a cast. He recalled that the girl was brought home in the back of a pickup truck. Instead of helping her out of the vehicle, neither parent offered any assistance. Poppy had to climb out on her own, struggling with her injury and carrying a heavy backpack. Rather than showing concern, Cobus impatiently rushed her, telling her to hurry up. The neighbor was shocked by this display of indifference and began suspecting that something was seriously wrong in the household. The incident with Poppy's broken leg, according to the neighbor, occurred after he had heard Cobus yelling at her. The shouts and insults could be heard through the house's windows, and shortly after the yelling was replaced by crying. This time, however, the crying sounded different, more like a scream of pain. The next day, Poppy was seen with her leg in a cast, making it clear that she had suffered a significant injury. The neighbor's suspicions were further fueled by other observations. He frequently heard arguments in the house. The parents' shouting often escalated into verbal attacks, with hurtful comments hurled back and forth almost daily. It seemed that even minor issues, such as mischief from the children, could set off bursts of anger. Although the neighbor never witnessed physical punishment firsthand, he strongly suspected that physical discipline accompanied the verbal abuse. The situation in Louise and Cobus' home increasingly drew the attention of those around them. At first, it was limited to occasional remarks and speculation, but over time, the number of troubling incidents grew. This became especially noticeable after the children stopped attending daycare altogether. In August 2016, Child Protection Services held a meeting with Louise and Cobus. The parents were ordered to attend regular sessions with a family psychologist and bring Johan and Poppy for weekly checkups with a pediatrician. This decision came after numerous reports from neighbors and daycare staff, but it took considerable effort to prompt authorities to intervene. Prior to this, the family's neighbor had repeatedly reported alarming incidents. One of the most shocking moments for him occurred when he saw Johan and Poppy standing outside in freezing weather, shivering from the cold. Cobus, holding a hose with icy water, sprayed them and forced them to strip down. He then made them repeat some sort of apology. The neighbor observing this couldn't understand what had triggered such cruel behavior. The children who had been sitting quietly on the porch before the incident had done nothing to cause trouble. According to Cobus, however, they had supposedly done something to provoke his anger. For the neighbor, this incident was the breaking point, and he decided to contact Child Protection Services. Despite his report, the situation didn't change immediately. The case wasn't referred to the police, and the neighbor's complaint was initially ignored. He had to contact multiple organizations to get anyone to pay attention. In the small settlement where the family lived, there was no local police station or courthouse, which made holding Cobus accountable even more challenging. Still, the neighbor refused to give up. In September 2016, the family suddenly vanished from their home. The neighbor who had been keeping an eye on the situation woke up one morning to find the house empty. Neither Louise nor Cobus informed him, or the daycare staff, about any plans to move. Cobus also hadn't resigned from his job, making the situation even stranger. The neighbor was convinced the family had fled to avoid further investigations and accountability. The family relocated to the Mammalese farm, several hours away from their previous home. Louise's mother lived there, though she rarely interacted with her daughter or grandchildren due to strained family relationships. Now, however, they were all under one roof. When the grandmother saw Johan and Poppy, she was shocked. Their bodies were covered in bruises, some of which were clearly recent. She immediately asked Johan what had happened. Despite being scared, the boy admitted that Cobus was responsible. Louise, who was present during this exchange, quickly interrupted, insisting that her son was making up stories. The grandmother, who had spent years living with an abusive partner herself, knew something terrible was happening in her daughter's home. Unsure of what to do, she decided to seek advice from the local pastor. Instead of offering support, the pastor accused her of meddling too much and said Louise needed to handle her family issues on her own. Discouraged, the grandmother stopped trying to seek help, fearing that any action she took might make things worse for her grandchildren. The family had been skipping the mandatory medical checkups ordered by Child Protection Services for several weeks. However, during one of their rare visits, doctors noticed new bruises on Poppy's body. Despite these findings, the injuries were not properly documented. One of the doctors failed to record the marks, citing that the girl couldn't clearly explain their cause, while her mother claimed the bruises were from frequent falls. This allowed the parents to evade accountability, even as the signs of mistreatment became increasingly apparent. On October 25, 2016, Louise arrived at the local hospital carrying Poppy in her arms. She was shouting that her daughter had fallen ill and begged the medical staff for help. But Poppy was already deceased. Doctors attempted resuscitation, but it was too late. The injuries on Poppy's body immediately raised serious concerns. Bruises covered nearly her entire body, including areas where such injuries are highly unusual. When asked about the origins of the bruises, claimed that Poppy had hit herself against the sides of the car during a bumpy ride on the way to the hospital. The medical staff quickly noted Louise's odd behavior. She appeared detached, showed no signs of grief, and seemed more concerned with avoiding trouble with the police. Comparing Poppy's condition with Louise's explanation, the doctors realized the situation required immediate involvement from law enforcement. An autopsy revealed that Poppy had numerous injuries at various stages of healing, providing critical evidence of long-term mistreatment. The bruises couldn't be explained away as accidental bumps against furniture or mishandling during transportation in the back of a pickup truck. When this information was handed over to the police, it became clear that Poppy's death was likely the result of prolonged abuse. Johan, 5 years old at the time and present at the hospital with his parents, became a focus of concern for the medical staff. The boy kept his distance from Louise and Cobus, avoided eye contact with them, and hid in a corner of the room. His body also showed signs of bruising, and when questioned, he quietly repeated that Poppy didn't want to eat anymore. The doctors suspected these words might be connected to the events leading to Poppy's death, and immediately contacted the police. The first officer to arrive at the scene was deeply disturbed by the photographs of Poppy's injuries. The extent and severity of the bruises on such a young child left him visibly shaken. Without delay, the police took Cobus into custody, though Louise was not immediately arrested. Authorities believed she might also have been a victim of abuse. As the investigation unfolded, detectives tried to piece together the sequence of events using statements from neighbors, the grandmother, and even Cobus himself. However, the accounts varied significantly, leaving many unanswered questions about the final days leading to Poppy's tragic death. During questioning, Louise claimed that the day before the tragedy, Poppy had accidentally hit her head on a cabinet. She described how, on the morning of October 25th, the girl appeared lethargic and barely moved. Later in the day, Cobus returned home, and according to Louise, he was often in a bad mood. She stated that she warned him not to bother the children due to their condition, but he ignored her. Louise alleged that she saw him kick Poppy in the stomach. However, instead of intervening, she said she left the house to go grocery shopping. When she returned, Cobus reportedly told her that something was wrong with Poppy. Louise said she found her daughter unconscious in an empty bathtub. Poppy's lips had turned blue. Her body was cold, and she was unresponsive. The couple attempted CPR, but it was unsuccessful. Instead of calling emergency services, they decided to take her to the hospital themselves. They placed Poppy in the bed of their pickup truck, later claiming this explained the numerous bruises on her body. This version of events was met with skepticism by everyone familiar with the situation. Poppy's grandmother, upon seeing the state of her granddaughter, didn't believe Louise's account. She recalled recent incidents when she had noticed bruises on the children and tried to draw attention to the issue. She also remembered how the pastor she had sought advice from discouraged her from taking further action, insisting she shouldn't interfere in Louise's life. The investigation gained momentum when a doctor who examined Poppy's body stated that the injuries couldn't possibly have been accidental. Testimonies from neighbors, the grandmother, and other witnesses were collected. The evidence, along with Louise and Cobus's conflicting explanations, laid the foundation for accusations of prolonged mistreatment. Forensic examinations revealed that Poppy had endured severe physical abuse over an extended period. The nature of her injuries indicated that she had been struck with hands and feet and thrown against walls or furniture. The primary cause of death was a traumatic brain injury resulting in a fatal hemorrhage. Poppy's body bore numerous bruises and abrasions, concentrated on her face, chest, and thighs. Experts concluded that these injuries were not the result of a single act, but rather systematic and deliberate harm. The findings shocked the local community, but the public's outrage was further fueled by the fact that Louise remained free for some time. While Cobus was in custody and facing attacks from other inmates, suspicion began to grow that Louise might have been just as complicit in the ongoing abuse. In the days leading up to Poppy's funeral, tensions boiled over. Two women pretending to be police officers convinced Louise to go with them to the station. Instead, they drove her outside of town and assaulted her, claiming they were avenging Poppy's death. At Poppy's funeral, Louise appeared with visible signs of injury. However, this did not evoke sympathy from those in attendance. The girl's biological father, Christo van der Maar, was present at the ceremony and openly accused his former wife of failing to safeguard their daughter. He believed Louise had always been indifferent toward her children. Throughout the service, Louise appeared distant, avoided communication, and displayed no outward emotion, further intensifying doubts about her role. Louise was arrested a month and a half following the funeral on December 15, 2016. She was charged with the same offenses as Cobus. Nevertheless, her arrest and the ensuing investigation were filled with difficulties. The trial did not commence until October 2017, mainly because of trouble finding attorneys willing to defend the accused and Cobus' worsening mental state, as he had attempted self-harm several times while in custody. A decisive moment in the proceedings was the testimony given by Johan, Poppy's brother. Johan disclosed that Cobus regularly harmed both him and Poppy while Louise stood by without stepping in to stop it. According to Johann, his mother frequently witnessed the abuse and even justified Kobus' actions to others. He also refuted Louise's assertions about trying to resuscitate Poppy. Johann stated that after Kobus had harmed Poppy, he submerged her head into a toilet in an effort to revive her. While Louise merely stood watching without taking action, Johann's account became the foundation for the charges against her. It supported statements from neighbors, the grandmother, and medical professionals, forming a complete picture of ongoing mistreatment inside the household. The trial concluded with a ruling that signaled the end of a lengthy and complicated case. Louise and Kobus were convicted of Poppy's death and were both sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In addition, the court imposed 10 further years onto their sentences for the continued abuse and threats directed at Johann. While issuing the verdict, the judge highlighted the extreme cruelty of their conduct and remarked on their absence of remorse throughout the proceedings. The investigation disclosed that during the months preceding Poppy's death, the family's neighbor had repeatedly attempted to bring attention to the matter. He reported witnessing bruises on both Poppy and Johann, hearing constant shouting, and observing the parents' suspicious behavior. Yet his complaints were never adequately addressed. Officials from Child Protection Services later asserted that logistical obstacles and bureaucratic delays had restricted their capacity to intervene. Nonetheless, no one from the agency faced accountability for failing to take action. During the trial, it was also revealed that Louise and Kobus had made no genuine effort to save Poppy when her condition deteriorated. Instead, they placed her in the bed of a pickup truck and drove her to the hospital, even though she was already dead. They attempted to attribute her bruises to the roughness of the road, but medical evaluations confirmed the injuries had been caused long before that. Poppy's death ignited widespread public outrage. Many within the community believed Child Protection Services should have acted earlier. Although the agency provided explanations, no one was held responsible for the negligence that contributed to the tragedy. The verdict delivered a sense of justice in a case involving a family that had remained outside the system's intervention despite obvious indications of abuse. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.